Hey friends, welcome in. In this demo, I'll be walking through how to structure a game in Godot 4 using compositional techniques. This is the second part in my little series on composition, so if you haven't seen the overview yet, you may be a little confused by what's going on. If you'd like to check it out, it'll be linked in the description below. With that said, let's move over to my composition demo, what I call MailQuest. First and foremost, let's talk setup. As you can see, I have several folders set up to organize my work, including the very important modules. These are our components that we'll be building out our scenes with. I've also added some assets, as well as a couple keybinds for user inputs, but we'll get into those just a little bit later. In MailQuest, we need a few actors. These scenes are basically just player characters or NPCs. Here we have dog, mail dog, unemployed human, mailman, and unemployed NPC. These scenes are all built off of character body 2Ds and have some similar code to each other, but promote modularity in their own ways. During this demo, if you'd like to follow along, check out the GitHub link in the description below where you can find this project. Dog and mail dog are currently unimplemented, so you can build these out following my examples. And just a note, these actors will not be inheriting from each other, so mailman will not inherit from unemployed human, mail dog will not inherit from dog. To some of you, this may seem a little silly. There is a reason why, and it has to do with the Godot editor. So if you're interested in that, I'll be covering how you can do this kind of inheritance, along with the composition techniques you'll see in this video in a much sought after episode 3 to this series out in a week or so. So feel free to subscribe to check that out when it comes out. Now let's take a look at some of the modules I've built for this project. First and foremost, I made input modules. I like to kind of nest them under a parent input folder so that you can distinguish if you have maybe an input for NPCs, for the player, for enemies, etc. This does have a little inheritance, and you'll see that a little bit later. In addition, I have movement modules under which is velocity. You can have things like friction in here as well. Slowdowns, maybe someone takes a potion that speeds them up, and you can have a module to handle all that kind of stuff. I also have modules for inventory, for mail, for speech, and I also added a simple detection module, but I didn't really fill it out yet. If you grab this project, you're welcome to take the techniques and run with them. First, we'll take a look at the parent input module. As you can see, this is pretty bare bones, and this is where the strength of composition really shows itself. Modules are meant to be lightweight and portable, so you separate out your functionality into these different modules, so each module is pretty small. You can put it along with pretty much any scene you'd like. So here we have variables for move input and jump input. Let's say anything that's going to have inputs will have inputs for those. So add a couple getters that we can then inherit, and we'll show you the player input module. This extends from class input and has its own class name, player input. And we add a run input variable. Let's say maybe the player is able to run, but NPCs and enemies can't necessarily. We have the handle move inputs function, which you saw from the input module itself. This can be pulled in parent scenes, and in the player input module, we want to check all of the player inputs. If you have two players too, you can check the ID of the controller or anything like that. But here we just have one player, and we just check left, right, UI accept is spacebar, and a sprint key, which we've set up in the input map. Now we can check out our NPC input. This is a little more complex. It does still extend from the input class, but I've put in a pretty rudimentary finite state machine that handles the movement states for the NPC. Movement is totally random, and as you can see in the comments, I just have random numbers that determine if the NPC is going to wander or if it's going to idle. As before, this state machine is in the handle move inputs function, so depending on if you want a character scene to be an NPC or a player, you just use a different input module, call the same function, and they're able to move. It's really as simple as that, and I'll show you some of the inner workings into how that can be leveraged for even better control. Finally, let's take a look at the enemy input module. Again, this extends from the input class with a class name enemy input, and the handle move inputs function this time around just grabs random values. In this demo, I don't use the enemy input at all, but you're welcome to slot this in instead of an NPC inputs when we get to filling out our compositional nodes later. You're welcome to play around with this, expand on it as you like. I just wanted to show a different option for, enemies or NPCs and show how they can be interchanged. Next, we'll take a look at the velocity module that I've built out. This leverages a lot of the functionality that's built in Godot 4 to node 2Ds to kinematic bodies and that kind of thing. So some of this you'll see is pretty similar to that. I've left notes in this code for ways to improve, things that you should take note of. But for the most part, what we do is we grab our inputs from the input and apply that to velocity. We have an activate move function that actually does the move and slide or move and collide if you'd like. This is important to separate these out, and I'll show that in a little bit. And I also made a calculate speed function so that if you have any modifiers, this could be one way of modifying your speed. The most integral part to all of this, which you may have seen already, is this export group nodes. This is pretty much duplicated with different contents across all of the scenes and modules that I use. I like to organize it this way. You can organize it however you would like to. However, inside this group, you see a node for in velocity module, the individual, which I'm calling the parent node, as well as the input node that is linked to the parent node. This can get a little spiderwebby, and you don't have to do it this way. You can do onReady vars if you'd like, but this way, the editor itself, when you run your project, will warn you if you haven't set something up properly. If you leave everything to onReady vars and you've changed the path or a node structure in your scene, it could cause a bunch of errors and a huge headache. So at least this way, things stay linked and it's good vibes all over the place. There is another quick note that I want to make while we're looking at the velocity module, and that is that I've exported speed and jump velocity. The reason that you should export this kind of variable is so that you can change it in the editor based on the parent scene. So if you have an NPC and you want the speed to be maybe half of the player speed, you could change that value to 150 in the editor. Or if you have an enemy and you want their jump velocity to be, maybe twice as fast, you can go ahead and do that right from the editor. And this is without having to change the values in the code itself. Things can all be linked to the scenes themselves without having to be changed in the script and hard-coded. Now, before we get to the ever-impressive mail module, let's talk about the inventory module, because this has some quirks that we will leverage in the mail module itself. Again, you see the export group nodes where I link to the parent character body 2D. Also, I have just integers stored for the size of the inventory and for the mailbag size. This you can change into being whatever you'd like, and you don't even need to store the values like this. I just like setting this up for the demo. I also have local variables for the actual item array and the mailbag array. And these are limited by the capacities set in the export variables above. In the ready function, I wanted to set up the parent node to be part of the group item receiver and mail receiver if the capacities are greater than 0. This means that you could set up an NPC that doesn't have a mailbag. Like maybe you have a cat and it can hold a couple items, but no mail. So leave the mail capacity to 0 and set the item capacity to 2. Then the parent won't be able to receive any mail, but it will be able to receive items. Again, this is a very flexible way of doing it, and this makes it so that you don't have to have complex paths. This makes it so that you don't have to know the endpoint of your parent scene. The code will just set everything up for you. I do have a function call in the ready function as well to update number labels. This function is purely for the demo, and it just iterates numbers on top of the actual player or NPC sprites with the number of items or number of mail pieces that they have. So that is one way that you can see numbers iterating as well. Now we get to the physics process, and it might be a little funny to think about an inventory having to process anything on the physics idle frame, and it is pretty funny. You don't need to. This is just for the demo again. This just takes those labels that I've set up above the players and positions them and continues to do so even in the editor. And I did set this as a tool script so that this will update in the editor window itself. So you can take a look at that, see things move in the editor without having to just guess where things are going to be. Then finally, I have a couple functions to add an item and add a piece of mail. This may seem a little confusing, but that's because I haven't gotten to my item classes yet. We'll get to that in a minute, but for now, just know that these functions add to the inventory. If you wanted to expand this, you could add removal functions, you could add sorting functions, you could add all kinds of stuff. But for now, this is all we need. And finally, the mail module. Again, we have our nodes export group. This is a habit that I've gotten into and I really like it. You could also use an export category for it, but things won't nest as nicely as I like them to in a category, so I like using the group. And we have a mailbag for anyone who can deliver mail. Now, an important note is this mail module extends from area to D, and that means that we're able to detect other areas or bodies within the area. The coup de grace of the mail module is the check mail input function. This is called regularly, and I'll show you where in just one moment. But basically, in this function, we check for the mail button to be pressed. If it is, and we don't have any more items in our mailbag, we exit, we say no mail left, no reason to stay in this function and do any more processing if we don't have any mail in our mailbag. Then we call a function called check target group. This is a function that I've set up that checks all of the bodies within the area 2D that we've set up. If any of the bodies in that area are mail receivers, which we saw how that's set up in the inventory module, and they don't match the mail giver, this can be changed with collision masks. I didn't want to get too complex with this. Then we return that body and go back to our check mail input function. Now, if there is one, which means it's not null, then we loop through our mailbag, find the first piece of mail that matches the receiver. If there isn't one, that's fine. We loop through anyway. We'll check all of our mail to see if this receiver has anything to give, and we'll deliver that mail. This deliver mail function does a little bit external that can be moved around or even moved into the inventory module, and I'll show you how that works in a little bit. Finally, we erase the piece of mail only if the mail has been received properly. And finally, I wanted to make a speech module. This just extends from a normal node, and again, it has the export group nodes for the individual. And basically all it does is if you press the speak button, it says your name. You can expand this to be anything you'd like to actually call up dialogue functions, but that's good enough for me. All right, now that we have all of our modules, let's go ahead and build an unemployed human. This is going to be a little complex to set up at first, but I think you'll quickly see how cool this is going to be, and I hope you see the potential that this kind of organization has. But from the setup, you'll see on the left-hand side the scene tree. I've set up a few containers that are just simple nodes that are named for whatever's inside of them. So for instance, I have a controllers node for input, for speak, things that the player will interact with. I have a movement group for the velocity. You can put jumps in here. You can put whatever you want in here. Something for appearance. You could put sprite 2Ds, animated sprite 2Ds. You could put a whole 3D rig in here if you'd like. And note, you also need your collision shape to inherit directly from your kinematic body or character body 2D in this case. So that's why it's not within appearance or movement or controllers. That's external. That is a necessity. And finally, I have a utility group. You can name these whatever you want. You can remove some, add some, whatever you want to do. But for the purpose of this demo, I have the utility group, and inside is an inventory module. To make any of this, let's go ahead and remove one module that I have. Let's remove the inventory module. And I'll show you how to add the inventory module. Now in the inspector window, you can change the different values. So you could change, let's say, your inventory capacity to 5 and your mail capacity to 3. This is just one human character, and you can change this on a scene-to-scene basis. Now, it's important to note that you need to link all of your child nodes, and this is where that export group nodes comes into play. You need to link them. And in the Godot editor, it's a very clean, spiffy way to do this. All you do is you click this button and you get a little window that pops up where you can see your current scene tree, set everything up, easy peasy. Now we have everything linked that we need to. And if we try to run the scene without everything set up, it'll start screaming at you and say, oh, maybe you need to link some of your scenes. Now in this unemployed human, I've also added a sprint modifier and an export group movement. I've added some modifiers to speed as well. These could be put in a child module. They could be linked in a new module if you'd like, or you can have them wherever you'd like. Again, anything that is together here can always be separated, or anything that's separated can be put together. It just depends on how complex you want to make your system. In the process function, because this unemployed human is a tool script, we have to check for if the engine is in the editor. If it is, get out. Do not handle the speak input while you're in the editor, because then it'll just be calling out that you don't have a speak node set up. It's a pain, so don't forget to set up this engine is editor hint return a couple of lines in any processing functions. In the physics process function, this is where the meat of everything happens. Because the sprite 2D does not inherit directly from the unemployed human, we need to set its position equal to the scene's position itself. This is something you need to either remember to do, or you can have the appearance itself be a node 2D so that everything is in 2D space. Again, here's my editor hint check so that we don't continue on if we're just in the editor. Clear all of your mods every time you go through this. Call your input node. Here we have the player input node, and we call handle all movements. Awesome. If the input node's run input is pressed, then add to the multiplier mods the sprint modifier. And you can change this from the inspector as well. Now we need to go to the velocity node and calculate the speed, sending our add mods and our multiplier mods. Now we handle our velocity. This is all of the calculations that we need to do. It takes in all the modifiers that we just inserted to the velocity node. And finally, activate move. This is why we kind of separate everything out, because if you had any other functions that need to be called between when you do the velocity calculations and when you move, you should be able to do those without being stuck inside the handle velocity function. And that's it. This is an unemployed human that's a player character. You've connected all of your nodes, and we do have a receive mail function. And again, mail reception could be its own module, or this could go to the inventory right away. I wanted to put this here to show some other kinds of functions that you can have in your parent classes, but honestly, I think this is a decent way of doing it. Now we'll take a look at the unemployed NPC. This is going to look extremely similar, but with a couple of changes. So we set up all of our nodes as before, and as you can see, we are missing our sprint modifier because the NPC doesn't need it. We have our modifiers here, but they could just be subbed in for empty brackets within the calculate speed function below. In the physics process, we start off much the same. Because this is a tool script, we want to be able to see the movement change in the editor. And then we check for if we're in the editor, return if not. Now we're going to handle our move inputs. And because we're leveraging the NPC input module instead of the player input module, we do not even need to calculate our running or sprinting. In the velocity node, we calculate our speed with our modifiers. Again, these could be empty brackets, but maybe NPCs would be able to slow down or speed up depending on their schedule for the day. Handle your velocity and activate your movement. Simple as that. It looks very similar to the unemployed human, and you can split these up into different functions if you'd like, but this is the meat of why you should leverage composition, because your physics process is very simple. In a normal game, this could be hundreds of lines to handle your movement, but here everything is compartmentalized. You can debug very quickly, and I hope that, that really resonates with you. And again, we have our receive mail function. You can see my note or my to-do here, and again, this could be put in its own module. Now the piece de resistance, the Mailman. Again, this just extends from the character body 2D, and it is a tool script as before. It has a name like the other unemployed humans, and we have our nodes, except this time we have a mail node. So this kind of separates the Mailman from those unemployed humans a bit. We have a sprint modifier because, again, maybe the Mailman can sprint if it's played by a player. In our process function, again, this is the idle frame. This is not the physics process. I would suggest putting things that don't depend on movement or actual physics or, need to be frame dependent to be put in here, such as handling the speak input or handling the mail input. Check your inputs here that are not related to movement. In the physics process, this is going to look a lot like the unemployed human, where we start off setting the position and we have a mail node that we are going to have to align with the Mailman itself. And then the rest is the same. We do our input checking, we calculate our speed, handle the velocity, and activate the movement. And then we have our receive mail function because mailmen need mail too. Okay, we've done it. We set up all of our modules, we set up our actors. Now, before we go and make an actual scene with all of our actors and modules, let's take a quick detour to our data. I said in the inventory section that I called out some classes for mail and for items, so that's what we're going to look at now. Now, these are all resources so that they can be saved and recalled very easily, and they can contain functions. If you're more old school, you could use other data collection techniques. You could use JSONs, you could use HTML, you can use whatever you want. Use a CSV if you want. But I like this because you can tie some functions into it. Here we have the name of the mail, the sender, the receiver, we have mail status, and we have an open boolean to determine if a mail piece has been opened, like in Animal Crossing maybe. We have a letter class that extends from that mail. This is some inheritance for you. And all we have are the contents. And I did an export multi-line here so you can see that you can have, a big old paragraph in here if you'd like. And even, add some BB code in there. We have our package class as well that extends from mail. So this is another type of mail that you can make that has an item inside. And I said you can have a list of items. I would probably cap it to 1 or 2, but, go wild. And if we take a quick look back at our inventory module, you can see that in the add mail function, we call out new mail as being of the type mail. So this could be a letter or a package or any other type of mail that you would like to make. Finally, I have a base item class with a name and a quantity. This is just for the inventory module as a whole. Okay, we did it. I'm proud of all of you. Hope you're proud of me. Let's make a scene. So here we have a main scene. I went ahead and made a platform with a collision shape and a sprite. This is just an abhorrently pink little platform to stand on. I made a section for actors, and here's where we're going to actually add all of our actors. Let's first add an unemployed NPC. Now, it's important that we make sure the inventory module is set up properly. We need to set the name, of course, and let's make sure everything is linked. The game engine itself will yell at you if you try to run without these linked, but try to get in the habit of setting these as you add actors to scenes. Now we'll do the Mailman, and there's an interesting quirk. This is pretty similar to last time, but also in the mail module, you need to make sure that you're setting the size of this area 2D to be whatever you'd like, and shape as well. This is wherever you're going to deliver mail to, so maybe you just want to deliver in front of the sprite or above. Who knows, maybe it's a top-down game and you need to go in any direction, but it's only the direction that you're facing. This could be changed, and you could change the position as you'd like. We're also going to set the speeds for each of these and the inventory sizes, and then we're good to go. That's it. We will place them over on top of the scene, and let's go ahead and hit play. Here I am walking along as the mailman. I'm going to go ahead and deliver this letter to this NPC, and wonderful. Everything's working perfectly, and you could see that the mail number iterated above the NPC. So that's composition. If there's anything I missed, let me know in the comments below. Feel free to play around with the demo code to your heart's content, and if you use these techniques in your games, I'd love to hear about it. Again, there is a part 3 to this composition series coming out in a week or so that will show how you can inherit your mailman from a human class without breaking the engine itself and still leveraging modular compositional techniques. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day today. Cheers.